If your budget is tight and has always been that way, it might be hard to imagine thinking about getting ahead of your expenses before they arise. You're still drowning in what happened yesterday or last month or last year. Having the foresight to plan for known upcoming expenses and the possibility of unknown upcoming expenses is one of the keys to getting out of the paycheck to paycheck cycle.
We're Mike and Stephanie and one special guest who didn't want to go to bed from sixfiguresunder.com, where we help families get out of debt and turn their financial goals into realities. This is day 21 of the Frugal Fresh Start Challenge. To start at the beginning or to see the other days, click on the playlist in the video description below.
As you live within your budget by only spending money you actually have and by lowering your bills and other expenses, you'll hopefully begin to find a little more flexibility in your finances. As this happens, you'll be able to plan ahead for future expenses so they don't set you back to square one or worse.
We'll start with planning for known periodic expenses. On day 6, your assignment was to write down categories for every type of thing you might spend money on. We tried to brainstorm those periodic expenses that we often forget until the bill arrives each year or every 6 months. It's really important to think ahead about these expenses and start setting money aside for them so they don't catch us by surprise. If we don't have funds set aside, having to cover a periodic expense all in 1 month can make it hard to stay on our budget.
We don't ever want to use money that we don't actually have, so we need to make sure we're setting something aside to take care of our periodic expenses along the way. The easiest way to do this is to divide the amount of the upcoming bill by the number of months you have to save for it. This is often referred to as a sinking fund. You don't need to move the money into a separate account unless you really want to. If you're spending according to your budget category balances, recording all of your spending, and reconciling regularly to catch any slip-ups, that money will be safe in your checking account exactly when you need it.
Let's look at an example. Every September you pay $600 for your life insurance premiums. Assuming it's now January, but too late to squeeze it into the January budget, you'll have from February through September 8 months to save for this annual expense. So divide that $600 bill by 8, and you'll get $75 a month. Each month, budget $75 into the category for life insurance. In September, you'll have $600 saved up and waiting for you there in the life insurance category. No sweat, no stress. The following year, you'll have an entire 12 months to save up for your annual premiums. So you only need to budget $50 each month toward life insurance.
For some periodic expenses, you won't know exactly how much they will be. For example, property taxes might change from year to year. Looking at the previous year's expenses will usually give you a good idea of what to plan for. Since costs generally go up, it's a good idea to overestimate what the expenses will be. Having a little money left over will be nicer than not having enough saved.
In addition to annual and other periodic bills, we'll probably have some expected expenses to save for even though we may not be sure when they'll come or how much they'll cost. Maybe you know in the next few years your home will need a new roof. Or perhaps your dentist has told you that your oldest daughter will need braces sometime soon. Or if you drive an older car, you might want to start setting aside some money for your next vehicle.
This is real life. We hope our roof will last several more years, but our budget right now has categories for both one daughter's braces and one new vehicle. We know exactly how much the braces will be, but you might not know when your car will die or when it will no longer be worth paying to fix, so you don't know how much time you have to save up for a replacement. Make an estimate and choose some amount to set aside each month in your car fund. Even if you don't have quite enough set aside by the time you need it, and you have to dip into your emergency fund a little bit, having some money saved can prevent financial hardship and borrowing.
Unexpected expenses can be an unprepared budget's worst nightmare. When a new vehicle suddenly needs expensive repairs or an illness requires costly medical procedures, we want our budget to be ready. I love having our budget prepared enough so we don't even have to touch our emergency fund to cover the expense.
Preparing for unknown expenses requires some guesswork. You won't know how much a future car or home repairs will cost or when they'll be needed. Looking at years past, you can estimate how much you generally spend on car repairs in a year, with the understanding that each year can vary greatly from the year before. Divide your average annual expense by 12 to get an idea of how much you should be setting aside each month for car repairs.
Just like expected expenses, having something to put toward these emergency expenses really will make a big difference, even if you don't have the full amount or still have to dip into your emergency fund for the remainder. As you get a few years of budgeting under your belt, your experience will help you better estimate amounts to save for these sorts of expenses.
There's another way to approach these expenses that we'll mention with a warning. For about 3 years while paying off law school loans, we entered an ultra-focused debt payoff mode and did things a little differently. We had cut our expenses to a ridiculously low amount, so we were able to put at least $2,000 towards student loans every month, even though our income-based minimum payment was actually zero. That left us with a lot of wiggle room. Instead of putting a chunk toward life insurance premiums each month, we put every dollar we hadn't spent at the end of the month toward debt payoff. On months where periodic expenses or unexpected expenses came up, we just paid them from that month's budget and paid less toward debt.
I don't recommend this method for most people though. The reason this worked for us is that we didn't have a minimum payment and our monthly income was a lot higher than our monthly living expenses. Unless we had some real catastrophic expense during a month, we'd be able to cover it within that month's budget. If it was really an emergency, we'd use the emergency fund. That let us get every penny into our debt as fast as possible, but it was a little uncomfortable. We're happy to be back in sinking funds now, so our money is waiting for us when we need it and where we need it. Oh, bless you.
It's time for your Day 21 challenge. Get out your workbook and take some time to think of your known periodic expenses like life insurance premiums, your expected expenses that aren't quite as defined like property taxes, and your unknown expenses like a vehicle replacement fund. Look ahead and decide how much you'll allocate to those budget categories. Refer back to the list of periodic expenses that you made on Day 6 to help you.
Have fun with that, and we'll see you back tomorrow.